So in this question, it's going to be just like question 8. I'm still looking to write an equation for the line that contains the point 4,6 and is perpendicular to the line y equals x minus 3. We're still looking for my slope, plugging it into my point slope form, and then converting it into slope intercept form. But first I need to find my slope. So what we know about perpendicular lines is that they'll have the opposite sign. So if it's negative, it'll be positive, and if it's positive, it'll be negative. And then we're going to take the fraction or the slope and flip it over. So I'm going to look at my slope here. I actually do not have a physical number. There's nothing right here, but it's invisible. So I can say that I have an invisible 1. So I'm going to change it. This is a positive 1. So I know I'm going to have a negative 1. And I can write this as negative 1 over 1, which still ends up being the same thing. So I'm going to say my slope is negative 1. So I know my slope is negative 1. When it comes to my 1s, it's the only time that if I flip it over, it'll be the exact same thing. So it'll be negative 1. So I'll take my negative 1, I'll take my point, and I'll plug it into my point slope form. So the things that never change are my y, my equal sign, my x in the front with the parentheses at the back. So I know my point is going to be negative, or my slope I should say, is negative 1. I look at my point. I have a positive 4. So when I plug it in, it'll be a negative 4. I have a positive 6. So I know I'm going to have a negative 6. So that is step 2. Step 2.5 or step 3 will be taking this and changing it to slope intercept form. So slope intercept form is y equals mx plus b, which means I don't have any parentheses and I don't have any numbers next to my y. So we're going to have to get rid of both. Nothing's going to happen so far to my left-hand side, so I'm going to write it anyways. Y minus 6 equals, I'm going to distribute negative 1 times x is a negative 1x. Negative 1 times a negative 4, I have a negative and a negative. That gives me a positive 4. I can now move this guy over because everything on this side is simplified. I'm going to do my upside down t. I'm going to add 6 to both sides. And I'm going to get y, this becomes a 0, equals, bring down my negative 1x, and 4 plus 6 gives me a 10. Now, if I don't want to have this negative, I could also write it as y equals negative x plus 10. The proper way would be doing it without the 1. But if I still see the 1, it's not the end of the world. So what did I do? I needed to find my slope first. However, with this equation, I technically didn't have a number physically there. So I need to use my previous, my information that I know about numbers. And remember that there's an invisible 1. I take that positive 1 and I change it to a negative 1. I put it into a fraction just so that I can practice the fact that I need to be flipping things around. But I still end up getting a negative 1. I take that negative 1 and plug it into my point slope form. I look at my point. If I see a positive 4, I'm going to write it as negative 4. If I see a positive 6, I'm going to write it as negative 6. I'm going to change the point slope form into slope intercept form. I'm going to multiply negative 1 times x to get negative 1x. Negative 1 times a negative 4 to get a positive 4. Add 6 to both sides, and I get y equals negative 1x plus 10. Or I can erase the 1 and write it as negative x plus 10.